Okay, so ever feel like you're kind of stuck with a service contract?
Yeah.
Like it just keeps renewing itself without you even realizing it?
Oh, yeah.
We're diving into that today. The world of automatic renewals.
Uh-huh.
Because you specifically asked about garbage pickup in Minnesota.
Yeah, and
And honestly, it's more interesting than it sounds.
it is way more interesting than it sounds.
We've got a legal document that lays out Minnesota's laws.
Right.
Some research on how different cities handle these garbage contracts, even examples from real companies.
Yep.
So by the end of this deep dive, we're going to arm you with the knowledge to understand your own garbage contracts, maybe spot some sneaky clauses, and know your rights if things go wrong.
Absolutely. And, these are things that affect almost everyone, but they often buried in the fine print.
Exactly. So let's jump right in.
Let's do it.
With this document, 2024-1227, Garbage Contract, Auto-Renewal Law.pdf.
Uh-huh.
It highlights Minnesota Statute 325G.56, which just went into effect this year.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it actually say about automatic renewals?
Well, it actually defines automatic renewal legally. It's not just any service that keeps going. It's a very specific thing written into a contract that extends it without you having to do anything.
Got it.
And, because most people don't expect that Minnesota puts some safeguards in place.
So instead of assuming we're all going to, pour over every detail of these contracts,
Mm-hmm.
the law forces companies to be upfront about it.
Right. Sellers have to clearly tell you about that auto-renewal clause when you sign up.
Okay.
Not hide it where you'll miss it.
Right.
Plus, they can't just spring it on you right before it renews. They need to send you a written notice 30 to 60 days ahead of time.
And that notice has to include how you can cancel.
Right.
Because otherwise, what's the point?
Exactly. And that's a great question because I think a lot of people haven't seen that notice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Have you ever actually seen one of these very detailed notices about canceling your garbage service?
I'm not sure that I have. I think it highlights the gap between what the law says and what we actually experience. But knowing the law is the first step to ensuring companies follow it.
Interesting. Okay, so now that we have kind of like the legal side down, let's look at how this plays out in different cities.
Okay.
Our research in garbageclause.txt had some examples from Minneapolis and St. Paul. So let's start with Minneapolis.
Okay.
The city itself handles weekly garbage pickup.
Right.
And we didn't find anything specifically about automatic renewals for that basic service.
Right.
But things get more complicated when you look at private companies.
Yeah, you do.
Like Aspen Waste Systems.
Yeah.
So if you go with a private company for, say, yard waste pickup, you might run into those automatic renewals.
Precisely. Private companies often have their own contracts. And that's where you need to watch out for those sneaky clauses.
And what about St. Paul?
So St. Paul is a bit different. Everyone has to have garbage service.
Oh, really?
It's mandatory.
Interesting.
But their yard waste service is interesting. It's not technically an automatic renewal by the legal definition, but if you use it last year, they assume you want it again unless you tell them otherwise.
So it's less like a contract that automatically renews and more like they just keep providing the service unless you specifically say stop.
Exactly. It's a subtle difference, but it's an important one, especially when it comes to your rights as a consumer. And, that brings us to a really interesting point in that legal document we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
There are some underlying sections that are super important.
You mean the parts about how you can cancel if a company didn't tell you about the automatic renewal properly?
Yes, those are crucial.
Yeah, those were very interesting.
The law recognizes that people might miss these things, so it gives you a way out if a company doesn't follow the rules.
That's good to know, because who actually reads every single word of these contracts?
Right.
I know I've felt pressured to sign things without fully understanding every single thing.
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why these laws exist. They're designed to protect people from companies hoping we won't read the fine print.
Right. It's almost like they're banking on us not reading it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's not even just about missing something.
Right.
It's about feeling like you don't have a choice.
Exactly.
But knowing these laws, it kind of levels the playing field at least a little bit.
For sure, knowledge is power.
Now, before we move on, there's one more thing in that garbageclause.txt file that we should highlight. And it basically says that this whole issue goes way beyond just garbage contracts.
It does.
We've been talking trash this whole time.
Yeah, we have.
But this applies to a whole bunch of services in Minnesota. Gym memberships, streaming services.
Yeah.
Those subscription boxes everyone loves.
Yep.
It's everywhere.
It is.
And the same rules apply.
Right.
companies need to be upfront about those automatic renewals.
Yes.
Tell you how to cancel.
Transparency is key.
It's a good reminder to always read your contracts no matter what the service is.
Absolutely. And, speaking of contracts,
Yeah.
before we wrap up this part,
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be really helpful to dive deeper into those underlying sections of the law that we mentioned,
Okay.
the ones about consumer rights.
You mean like what you can actually do?
Exactly. Let's get into those consumer rights next.
Yeah, those were like the aha moment to me. It was like, finally, here's where the power shifts back to the consumer.
Yes, I agree.
But let's break it down a bit. What exactly do these sections say people can do if a company isn't playing by the rules?
Okay, so imagine this.
Okay.
You signed up for a service, and they didn't tell you up front about the automatic renewal, or maybe they buried in the fine print.
Yeah.
The law says you have the right to cancel that contract without penalty.
So no cancellation fees or having to pay for the rest of the year, even if you don't want the service anymore.
That's right.
That's huge.
It is, and it gets better.
Okay.
Let's say you did know about the auto-renewal, but the company didn't give you proper notice about how to cancel. Or they didn't give you enough time. You still have the right to cancel.
So even if you technically agree to it at the start, if they mess up the notice part, you're not trapped.
Exactly. The law is on your side, and this isn't just some theoretical thing. There have been real cases where people use these provisions to fight back against companies that weren't being transparent.
Do you have any examples?
Absolutely. There was a case a few years ago involving a gym membership.
Oh, yeah, those are always tricky.
Right. So the company automatically renewed the person's membership without sending them a proper notice with clear instructions on how to cancel. The customer took them to court citing this very law, and they won.
Wow.
They got out of their contract and even received a refund for the renewal period.
That's incredible. So it shows that these laws have teeth and that individuals can actually use them to protect themselves.
Yes, they do.
So what's the catch?
Well, the catch is that you have to be aware of your rights in the first place.
Right.
A lot of people just assume they're stuck with these contracts, but that's not always the case. That's why we're doing this deep dive to arm you with the knowledge to spot these things.
Right. And it goes back to that point you made earlier. Read your contracts, even if it's boring or it seems straightforward.
Yes, and don't be afraid to ask questions if something seems unclear or if you're not sure about the renewal terms, reach out to the company.
That's good advice.
It's better to clarify up front than to feel trapped later on.
For sure. So this is all great advice for garbage contracts specifically.
Right.
But I'm thinking about all those other services we mentioned.
Yeah.
Gym memberships, streaming subscriptions, those meal kit things. Those could be even harder to keep track of.
They can.
Is there anything unique about those types of contracts that we should be aware of?
That's a fantastic question, and it gets to the heart of why understanding these laws is so important. Because while the specifics might differ, the underlying principle of transparency and consumer protection applies across the board.
So those laws we've been talking about, they're not just for garbage. They cover all those other services too.
Exactly. Whether it's your gym membership or your favorite streaming service, the company has to follow these same rules about clear disclosures, proper notice, and giving you a way out.
But I feel like those types of companies are notorious for making it hard to cancel.
Yeah.
Like you have to click through 5 different screens, enter a bunch of information, and then maybe even call customer service to finally get out of it.
You're absolutely right, and that's where things get tricky. Companies might technically be following the letter of the law, but they make the process so difficult that many people just give up.
So what can you do in those situations? Is there any recourse if a company is being intentionally difficult?
There are, and this is where things get really interesting. Oh, there are a few things. So firstly, remember, documentation is key.
Okay.
Take screenshots of those convoluted cancellation processes.
Okay.
Save emails, keep records of any phone calls.
So if they're giving you the runaround, you have proof that it wasn't a simple, clear process.
Exactly. And if your attempts to cancel are unsuccessful or unreasonably difficult, don't hesitate to reach out to consumer protection agencies.
Okay.
Minnesota has a great one.
Oh, yeah.
The Attorney General's office.
Okay.
They're dedicated to handling these kinds of complaints.
So it's like you've got backup, when you feel like you're hitting a wall with this company.
Absolutely. And you can also leverage the power of online reviews and social media.
Ooh, interesting.
Companies often respond pretty quickly when their reputation is on the line.
Yeah, nobody wants a bad review.
Right. So shining a light on unfair practices can sometimes be more effective than you might think.
It's like that old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Exactly. And lastly, remember, you can always seek legal advice.
Okay.
Sometimes a simple letter from an attorney can be enough to get a company to back down.
So to recap, even if a company seems to be following the letter of the law,
Right.
there are still things you can do if they're making it unreasonably difficult to cancel.
You got it.
Document everything. Reach out to consumer protection agencies. Use the power of the internet. And don't be afraid to get legal help.
Exactly. And, this deep dive we've been doing focused specifically on Minnesota.
Right?
Laws vary from state to state.
Of course.
So it's always a good idea to research the specific regulations where you live.
That's such an important reminder. What might be perfectly legal in one state could be illegal in another.
Exactly. And you know what?
What?
Maybe your state needs better laws.
Oh, interesting.
To protect consumers.
Yeah.
Understanding the laws in your area can even empower you to advocate for change.
Okay.
You could contact your local representatives and push for stronger consumer protection measures.
So what started as a question about garbage contracts has turned into a much bigger conversation.
It has.
About consumer rights and how to fight back against unfair practices.
Uh-huh.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But the key takeaway is clear.
What's that?
Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. Read your contracts, know your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself.
And if you ever find yourself struggling with an automatic renewal or a difficult cancellation process, remember that you're not alone. There are resources available to help you.
That's right.
So the next time you're about to sign a contract channel, your inner detective, look for those auto-renewal clauses. Understand your rights, and make sure you're not signing up for something you don't want.
Great advice. And don't forget to share what you learned with your friends and family.
Well, that's a good point.
Spreading the word can help protect others from falling into the same traps.
That's right. Empowering one person can lead to empowering many.
Absolutely.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and, most importantly, useful.
And
tuning in